My name is Lily. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been lived in the quiet, dusty archives of my town's history. 6 weeks ago, the quiet was shattered when my grandparents, the only two people who ever truly saw me, were taken in a tragic accident. I was still drowning in grief when I learned they had left me everything in a estate worth over $30 million. The day I told my parents, they didn't offer condolences. They offered a contract. They demanded I sign over my entire inheritance to them for proper management, convinced I was too naive to handle my own life. What they didn't know was that my grandparents had left me something far more valuable than money: a meticulously crafted battle plan. If you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this life-altering inheritance unmasked the people I was supposed to trust most, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and finding your own strength. Before that fateful Tuesday, my life was defined by a comfortable, if somewhat lonely, predictability. I worked as a town archivist and librarian, a job that paid little but offered immense personal satisfaction. I spent my days surrounded by the ghosts of the past brittle letters, faded photographs, and forgotten town records. It was a world of whispers and stories, and I was its devoted keeper. My apartment was a small one-bedroom above a bakery, always smelling faintly of yeast and sugar. It was filled with more books than furniture, a cozy sanctuary from a world that often felt too loud. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, never understood my chosen path. My father was a senior financial advisor at a large firm, a man who measured success in stock portfolios and luxury car models. My mother's career was managing their social standing, a full-time job of charity luncheons and country club networking. To them, my passion for history was a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby, not a profession. "When are you going to get a real job, Lily?" my father would ask over obligatory holiday dinners, not unkindly, but with a dismissive air that stung more than any insult. The real star of the family was my younger brother, Mark. He was the golden child, the one who inherited our father's ambition but none of his discipline. At 26, Mark was a serial entrepreneur, flitting from one next big thing to another, each venture funded by a generous investment from our parents. There was the artisanal pickle company, the subscription box for dog toys, the app that was meant to be the Uber for lawn care. Each one failed spectacularly, leaving my parents tens of thousands of dollars poorer, but their faith in Mark's supposed genius never wavered. "He just needs to find the right market," my mother would say, defending him fiercely. "He has the vision." My vision, however, was always overlooked. I remember the day I received the letter confirming my full scholarship for my master's in library and information science. It was a prestigious program, and I had worked tirelessly on my application. I called my parents, my voice trembling with excitement. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother said, her tone distracted. "Listen, I have to run. Your brother just landed a huge meeting with a potential investor for his new coffee brand. We're all going out to celebrate tonight. I wasn't invited." The celebration was for Mark, the son with vision, not the daughter with a full-ride scholarship. I ate a celebratory dinner of macaroni and cheese alone in my tiny apartment that night, the acceptance letter lying on my small kitchen table like a secret only I knew was important. This pattern was the story of my life. My achievements were met with polite indifference, while Mark's failures were cushioned by endless support and financial bailouts. When I painstakingly restored a collection of 19th century town ledgers, earning a commendation from the State Historical Society, my parents forgot to even mention it. The following week, they threw a lavish party after Mark convinced them to mortgage their vacation home to fund his latest venture, a line of smart water bottles. The only people who truly valued me were my grandparents, Arthur and Evelyn. They were the ones who had instilled in me a love for the past. Grandpa Arthur was a retired history professor, a man with twinkling eyes and a seemingly endless supply of stories. Grandma Evelyn was a painter, her hands perpetually smudged with charcoal and pastel dust. Their house, a rambling old farmhouse on the edge of town, was my real home. It smelled of old paper, turpentine, and my grandmother's famous apple pie. They never missed a single milestone. They drove 4 hours to attend my university graduation, cheering louder than anyone when my name was called. They visited my library, asking thoughtful questions about my work and handling the fragile documents with a reverence my parents could never muster. "You're a guardian of memories, Lilybug," my grandfather would say, his voice thick with pride. "There's no work more noble than that." They saw my quiet nature not as a weakness, but as a strength. They understood that my passion wasn't for dust and decay, but for the human stories that connected us all. They were my champions, my confidant, and the emotional anchor of my life. I spoke to them every Sunday, a ritual that was as sacred as my morning coffee. They listened to my frustrations about work, my quiet joys, and my feelings of invisibility within my own family. "Don't you let them dim your light, sweetheart," Grandma Evelyn once told me, her voice firm. "Some people are so busy looking for glitter, they miss the gold." Her words became a mantra I would repeat to myself after every dismissive comment from my parents, after every family event where I felt more like a piece of furniture than a daughter. I tried to believe them. I really did. I poured myself into my work, found solace in the lives of people long gone, and accepted my role as the responsible, invisible daughter. I thought this was the way things would always be: a quiet life, a distant family, and the unwavering love of 2 people who were my whole world. I had convinced myself that their love was enough to make up for everything else, but I was about to learn that their love was not only an anchor for my past, but a weapon for my future. I just didn't know how soon I would be forced to use it. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of day that feels full of promise. I was in the basement of the library, carefully digitizing a collection of Civil War letters, when my phone rang. It was my father, his voice strained and unfamiliar. "Lily," he said, and the single word was so heavy, I knew something was terribly wrong. "There's been an accident. It's your grandparents." They had been driving to their favorite nursery to buy seedlings for their vegetable garden, a springtime ritual they'd honored for 50 years. A truck had run a red light, hitting their car with such force that they were gone before the paramedics even arrived. The officer on the phone used words like instantaneous and no suffering, phrases meant to be a comfort but which only amplified the brutal finality of it all. The world tilted on its axis. One moment, they were Arthur and Evelyn, my vibrant, storytelling, pie-baking grandparents. The next, they were a case file, a police report, a memory. My grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. I remember stumbling out of the library, the world outside seeming obscenely bright and cheerful, completely unaware that my personal universe had just collapsed. The days that followed were a blur of hollow-eyed relatives and hushed condolences. My parents immediately took charge of the funeral arrangements, their efficiency a stark contrast to my paralytic sorrow. My father handled the logistics with the grim determination of a corporate merger, negotiating costs with the funeral director and coordinating travel for distant family. My mother busied herself with the social aspects, writing the obituary, selecting the flowers, and managing the endless stream of sympathy calls. They seemed to see grief as a project to be managed, a series of tasks to be completed. Mark flew in from his latest business hub in Austin. He hugged me awkwardly at the funeral home, smelling of expensive cologne and impatience. "It's a real shame," he said, checking his phone over my shoulder. "Grandpa was a great old guy. Did he ever mention to you what his portfolio looked like?" The question was so jarring, so utterly devoid of empathy, that I couldn't even form a response. I just stared at him until he shifted uncomfortably and walked away to make a call. Throughout the wake and the funeral, I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I saw my parents accepting sympathies, their faces etched with a sadness that felt practiced. I heard my brother on the phone in the hallway, his voice low but agitated, talking about liquid assets and probate timelines. They were all moving through the motions of mourning, but their focus seemed to be elsewhere. It was as if they were already looking past the tragedy, towards the administrative aftermath. I, on the other hand, couldn't see past the 2 closed caskets at the front of the church. I was lost in memories, My grandfather teaching me how to identify constellations. My grandmother showing me how to mix the perfect shade of periwinkle blue. Their absence was a gaping wound, and I didn't know how I would ever begin to heal. 2 weeks after the funeral, the call came from a Mr. Harrison, my grandparents' longtime attorney. He requested a meeting with me, my parents, and my brother for the reading of the will. The atmosphere in our car on the way to his office was thick with a strange, unspoken anticipation. "We need to be prepared for anything, Eleanor," my father said, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. "People get sentimental in their old age. But logically, the estate should be split between the direct heirs. I knew direct heirs meant him as their son. Mark, in the back seat, was less subtle. "I hope they made things simple," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Probate can be a nightmare. I've got a new venture that needs seed funding, and this could really expedite the process." They were talking about my grandparents' legacy as if it were a business transaction, a financial windfall that was rightfully theirs. I said nothing, clutching the small, worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird my grandmother had given me on my 16th birthday. It was the only thing that felt real. Little did I know, the simple life I had always known was about to be set on fire, and the people in the car with me were holding the matches. Mr. Harrison's office was like something out of an old film walls lined with leather-bound books, the air smelling of wood polish and aged paper. He was a kind-faced man in his late 60s with gentle eyes that held a genuine sadness. He had been my grandparents' friend as well as their lawyer. "Lily," he said, taking my hand as we were shown in, "I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Arthur and Evelyn were two of the finest people I have ever known." His sincerity was a stark contrast to the tense, transactional energy radiating from my parents and brother. We sat around a large mahogany conference table. My father positioned himself at the head, as if presiding over a board meeting. Mark was tapping his foot impatiently, while my mother arranged her face into an expression of solemn grief. I just felt numb. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened a thick portfolio. "Before I begin," he stated, looking directly at my parents, "I want to make it clear that Arthur and Evelyn were in full command of their faculties when they drafted this final will 6 months ago. They were deliberate and explicit in their wishes." My father gave a curt nod. "Of course. Just proceed, David." Mr. Harrison began to read the formal legal language, and I could feel my family's restlessness growing. Then, he arrived at the crucial section. "We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including all financial assets, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and personal effects, valued at approximately $30 million. He paused, and I saw my father lean forward almost imperceptibly to our beloved granddaughter, Lily Ann Foster. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I was sure I had misheard. 30 million? To me? My father was the first to speak, his voice a low growl. "What did you just say?" Mr. Harrison continued, his tone unwavering. "We make no provisions for our son, Robert Foster, or our grandson, Mark Foster, as we have provided them with significant financial support throughout their lives, the details of which are documented and appended hereto." "This is an outrage!" my mother gasped, her practiced composure shattering. "They were senile! She must have manipulated them." Mark shot out of his chair. 30 million? To a librarian? What is she going to do with it? Buy more dusty books? "This is a joke! I have a business to build." My father stood up, his face flushed with rage, and snatched the document from Mr. Harrison's hands. He scanned it frantically, his finger tracing the lines as if seeking a loophole. "We will contest this. This is elder abuse. No court will uphold this." "I would advise against that, Robert, Mr. Harrison said calmly. "As I said, they were evaluated for cognitive competence by 3 separate physicians before signing. Furthermore, they left something else." He gestured to a laptop on the table. "A video message. For you all." The screen flickered to life, and suddenly, there they were. My grandparents, sitting on the familiar floral sofa in their sunroom. Seeing them, hearing their voices, was a physical blow. "If you are watching this," my grandfather began, his voice steady, "it means we are gone. And we know there may be some confusion about our final wishes." Grandma Evelyn looked directly into the camera, her eyes full of a sad resolve. "Robert, Mark," she said, "we love you. But love does not mean blindness. For years, we have watched you prioritize status and money over family. We have funded failed businesses and bailed you out of poor decisions, hoping you would learn the value of hard work and integrity." My grandfather continued, "We built our life on simple principles. Live modestly, give generously, and value people over possessions. Lily is the only one who has truly embraced those values. She has chosen a life of purpose over profit. She has shown compassion and quiet strength. We trust her, and only her, to be the steward of what we've built." The video ended, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. The unmasking had begun. That very evening, they ambushed me at my apartment. They didn't knock. My father used the spare key I'd foolishly given him for emergencies. I found them waiting in my small living room, their presence making the space feel cramped and hostile. "We need to talk, Lily," my father said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This situation is untenable." What followed was not a conversation, but a hostile negotiation where I was the sole target. "Your grandparents were clearly not in their right minds," he began. "They were old and sentimental. They didn't understand the complexities of wealth management." "Sweetheart," my mother added, her voice dripping with false concern, $30 million is a tremendous burden. You don't have the experience to handle it. You could lose everything. Your father does this for a living. He can protect it for you, for the family. Here's the proposal," my father said, sliding a folder across my coffee table. "You will sign a power of attorney, giving me full control of the estate. I will set up a small trust for you, enough to cover your living expenses so you can continue with your hobby. The rest will be managed properly within the family portfolio." "Which means you'll give it all to Mark for another one of his doomed projects," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Mark, who had been sulking on my armchair, exploded. "Doomed? My projects have potential. I just need proper capitalization. Something you wouldn't understand. You're being incredibly selfish, Lily. This money could change all of our lives, but you just want to hoard it." I tried to reason with them. Grandma and Grandpa were very clear. They trusted me. "They were old," my mother snapped, her mask of concern falling away. "They didn't know what they were doing. We are your parents. You owe us your obedience. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" The argument raged for over an hour. They cycled through tactics, condescension, guilt, pity, and veiled threats. They belittled my career, my lifestyle, my intelligence. I felt myself shrinking, the old feelings of inadequacy washing over me. Maybe they were right. What did I know about managing that kind of money? Exhausted and overwhelmed, I finally told them I needed time to think. As they left, my father paused at the door. "Don't take too long, Lily. We're prepared to do what's necessary to protect this family's assets." The threat was clear. I collapsed onto my sofa, the room still feeling tainted by their presence. I felt lost, confused, and utterly alone. I picked up my phone and called my best friend from college, Sarah. She was a no-nonsense ER doctor in Chicago, and the only person I knew who would give me the unvarnished truth. I poured out the entire story, from the will reading to the ambush in my apartment. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Sarah's voice, clear and sharp, cut through my confusion. "Lily, listen to me," she said. "This is not about protection. This is a hostile takeover. They're not calling you naive because you're incapable. They're calling you naive because they hope you are. Your grandparents, the two people who knew you best in the entire world, trusted you. Not them. You. Why do you think that is?" Her words were a splash of cold water. Why did they trust me? They knew my parents. They knew Mark. They had seen it all for years. Their decision wasn't sentimental or senile. It was a deliberate, calculated choice. It was their final act of love and protection. And as the truth of Sarah's words settled in, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve. I had spent my entire life being the quiet one, the one who stepped aside. But I was the guardian of my grandparents' legacy now, and I was not going to let them down. I didn't know it yet, but the fight had only just begun, and my parents' next move would be more ruthless than I could have ever imagined. In the week that followed, my parents launched a campaign of psychological warfare. The phone calls were relentless. My mother would call in the morning, weeping about how I was tearing the family apart. She'd talk about her sleepless nights, her worries about the family's future, and how my stubbornness was causing her physical pain. It was a masterclass in emotional blackmail, designed to make me feel like a cruel, ungrateful daughter. My father's calls came in the afternoon. His approach was different, cold, logical, and filled with thinly veiled threats. He talked about the legal avenues they were exploring, the cost of litigation, and how a public court battle would be incredibly messy for everyone. "Do you really want your grandparents' good name dragged through the mud, Lily?" he'd ask, his voice smooth as silk. "Reporters will dig into everything. Is that the legacy you want for them?" He was weaponizing my love for them against me. Mark's contributions were limited to angry text messages, usually sent late at night. They were a mix of childish insults and desperate pleas. "You're destroying my future. I need that funding. How can you be so selfish?" I tried to hold my ground, repeating that I needed time and that I intended to honor my grandparents' wishes, but their combined assault was wearing me down. I stopped answering the phone, which only made them escalate. They started showing up at my apartment unannounced, forcing me to either face them or hide inside, my heart pounding every time I heard footsteps in the hall. They even tried to turn my own space against me. One evening, I came home from work to find a stack of brochures from high-end financial management firms on my coffee table, left there by my father, who had, once again, let himself in. The message was clear. "We can get to you anytime, anywhere." I felt like a prisoner in my own life. The joy and security my grandparents' gift should have brought me had been replaced by fear and constant anxiety. The library, once my sanctuary, now felt like a temporary hiding place. I started losing weight. I couldn't sleep. The quiet, predictable world I had cherished was gone, replaced by a battlefield I had never asked to be on. The final, unforgivable act, the one that shattered any remaining illusion I had about my family, came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I had an appointment with Mr. Harrison to go over the initial steps of managing the estate. Knowing I would be out for a few hours, I had double-locked my door and put my phone on silent to focus. The meeting was a beacon of hope in a sea of turmoil. Mr. Harrison was calm and reassuring. He explained the basics of trusts and foundations and introduced me to a financial advisor, a warm, intelligent woman named Clara, who spoke to me with respect, not condescension. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of excitement. I started to see what my grandparents had envisioned: a chance to do real good, to fund literacy programs, to preserve local historical sites, to create a legacy of kindness and community. I left the lawyer's office feeling empowered, a feeling that lasted until I turned onto my street. I saw my father's car parked out front, and my brother's. My stomach plummeted. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, and my blood ran cold. They had not just entered my apartment, they had ransacked it. It wasn't a violent destruction, but something far more insidious. My books, my precious, carefully curated collection, had been pulled from the shelves and stacked haphazardly on the floor. My personal papers, bills, letters, my private journal were spread across my desk as if they had been searching for something. But the worst was in my bedroom. On my bed, laid out like a museum exhibit, were some of my grandmother's most personal belongings, items I had brought back from her house to keep close. Her favorite cashmere shawl, her small wooden box of painting supplies, and her personal diaries. My father and brother were standing in the middle of the living room, their faces grim. "We had to be sure, Lily," my father said, his voice devoid of any apology. "Sure of what?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like ice in my veins. "What could possibly justify this?" "We were looking for evidence," Mark said defensively. Evidence that you unduly influenced them. Letters, anything. You went through my journal? You read my grandmother's diaries? The violation was so absolute, so intimate, I felt physically ill. It was necessary, my father stated, as if discussing a business strategy. And in doing so, we've come to a decision. This has gone on long enough. You've proven you're not emotionally stable enough to handle this responsibility. He held out a piece of paper. It was the same power of attorney document from before. You will sign this now, or we will call an emergency hearing on Monday morning and file for a conservatorship claiming you are mentally incompetent. We will use your own journal entries about your anxieties and your grief as evidence. That was it. That was the moment. The threat wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my autonomy, my sanity, my very identity. They were willing to use my most private thoughts, my grief for the people they claimed to love, as a weapon to declare me unfit and strip me of everything. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to erase me. In that instant, all the fear and doubt that had been clouding my mind evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I looked at the two men who shared my blood but not an ounce of my values. I looked at the violation of my home, the desecration of my grandmother's memory, and I realized a devastating truth. I had no family in this room, and if I didn't fight for myself, no one would. The quiet librarian was gone. In her place was the guardian of a legacy, and she was finally ready for war. A strange calm settled over me. The shock had morphed into a chilling, diamond-hard resolve. I looked at the document in my father's hand, then at the mess they had made of my home, my sanctuary. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Get out," I said. My voice was quiet, but it held a new weight that made both of them pause. "What did you say?" my father asked, his brow furrowing in disbelief. I said, "Get out of my apartment. Now." I walked over to the door and held it open. "We have nothing more to discuss today." Mark scoffed. "You're making a huge mistake, Lily. We're giving you one last chance to do the right thing." "The right thing," I repeated, a humorless laugh escaping my lips, "is for you to leave before I call the police and report you for breaking and entering." The threat of involving outsiders, of making their private power play public, was enough to make them move. My father threw the document onto the coffee table. "Monday morning, Lily. We'll see you in court." They stormed out, slamming the door behind them, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my life. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I photographed everything, the scattered books, the papers on my desk, the violation of my grandmother's belongings on my bed. I documented the scene with the meticulous detail of an archivist, creating a record of their crime. Then, I packed a small overnight bag. I knew I couldn't stay there. It no longer felt like home. My final act before leaving was to call a locksmith and schedule an immediate appointment. My first and only call was to Mr. Harrison. I explained what had happened, my voice steady and factual. "They've threatened to file for a conservatorship on Monday, claiming I'm mentally incompetent." "They will not succeed," Mr. Harrison said, his voice firm and reassuring. "But they have shown their hand. It's time we showed them ours. Your grandparents prepared for this, Lily. Not this exact scenario, perhaps, but for this level of ruthlessness. Can you meet me at my office in 1 hour?" When I arrived, Mr. Harrison wasn't alone. Clara, the financial advisor, was with him, as was a sharp, formidable-looking woman he introduced as Eleanor Vance, one of the top litigation attorneys in the state. "Eleanor will be representing you should this proceed to court," Mr. Harrison explained. He then slid a heavy, leather-bound box across the conference table. "Your grandparents called this their legacy box. They left it in my care with explicit instructions to give it to you if your family ever tried to contest their will or control your inheritance." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, it was like looking at the final, secret chapter of my grandparents' lives. The first thing I saw was a thick, sealed envelope with "For Our Lilybug" written in my grandmother's elegant script. Beneath it were meticulously organized files. The first file was labeled Mark's Ventures. Inside was documentation for every single loan and investment my grandparents had given my parents to fund my brother's businesses over the past 8 years, canceled checks, loan agreements, even emails in which my grandfather had expressed his reservations about the viability of the projects. It totaled over $500,000 of support that had yielded nothing but debt. The second file was titled Robert's Advice. It contained records of financial advice my father had given my grandfather over the years, advice that, in several documented instances, had resulted in significant losses that my grandfather's own conservative strategy had to then recover from. It was a clear record of my father's reckless and often self-serving financial judgment. But the most powerful item was at the bottom of the box. It was a USB drive. Your grandfather recorded a final video message a few days after they finalized the will, Mr. Harrison said gently. He said it was an insurance policy for your heart, Lily. With the three of them as witnesses, I opened the letter from my grandmother. It was filled with her love and wisdom, but also a stark warning. Dearest Lily, she wrote, we have left you our worldly possessions, but we fear we have also left you a battle. Your father and brother are driven by things we have never understood: pride, greed, a desperate need for the approval of others. They will see our gift to you not as an expression of our love, but as a slight to them. They may try to bully you, to make you feel small and incapable. Do not believe them. You have a spine of steel, even if you don't always show it. We have given you the tools in this box not to be cruel, but to be strong. Use them to protect yourself and the future we know you will build. Tears finally streamed down my face. Tears of grief and gratitude. Even in death, they were protecting me. Eleanor Vance, the litigator, spoke for the first time. This box isn't just a collection of memories, Miss Foster. It's a silver bullet. The documentation of your brother's financial failures and your father's poor judgment would make any claim of their superior financial stewardship laughable in court. And their actions today, breaking into your apartment, threatening a frivolous conservatorship that's harassment and attempted coercion. We don't have to wait until Monday. We can go on the offensive. Over the next 2 hours, we formulated a plan. It was bold, decisive, and it put me firmly in control. We would not be defending myself in court on Monday. Instead, we would be calling the final family meeting. Eleanor drafted 2 documents. The first was a cease and desist letter, ordering my parents and brother to stop all contact and harassment immediately. The second was a restraining order, ready to be filed, using the evidence of their break-in and threats. We won't file it yet, she explained. We'll use it as leverage. The plan was simple. I would call my parents and Mark and summon them to a meeting at Mr. Harrison's office the next afternoon. I would tell them I was ready to discuss the power of attorney. They would arrive expecting my surrender. What they would get was a reckoning. Clara, the advisor, would be there to speak to the financial realities. Eleanor would be there to lay out the legal consequences. And I would be there, armed with my grandparents' final words, ready to claim my life. I left the office that night and checked into a hotel, my overnight bag in hand. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to my family's drama. I was directing the final act. The following afternoon, I sat in the same mahogany conference room where my world had been turned upside down just weeks before. But this time, the atmosphere was entirely different. I wasn't a grieving, numb victim. I was flanked by my team, Mr. Harrison, calm and paternal. Clara, the financial advisor, with a portfolio of facts at her fingertips, and Eleanor Vance, whose sharp, intelligent presence radiated an unshakable confidence. I was in control. My family arrived exactly on time, a united front of smug expectation. My father walked in first, holding the power of attorney document like a trophy. My mother followed, her face a mask of worried concern that I now recognized as pure performance. Mark trailed behind them, already looking bored, as if my capitulation was a foregone conclusion that was wasting his valuable time. Their confidence faltered the moment they saw we weren't alone. "What is all this, Lily?" my father demanded, his eyes narrowing as he took in Eleanor and Clara. "This is a private family matter." It stopped being a private matter the moment you broke into my home and threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent, I replied, my voice perfectly level. Please, sit down. They hesitated, but something in my tone, or perhaps the formidable presence of Eleanor Vance, made them comply. They sat opposite us, the large table feeling like a great divide. I've considered your offer, I began, looking my father directly in the eye. The power of attorney. And my answer is no. Don't be foolish, Lily, he started, but Eleanor cut him off. Mr. Foster, she said, her voice crisp and clear. My client is speaking. You would do well to listen. My father's mouth snapped shut, a flicker of shock in his eyes. He wasn't used to being silenced. I will not be signing any documents, I continued. I will not be relinquishing control of my inheritance. And I will not be bullied, threatened, or manipulated any longer. My grandparents entrusted their legacy to me, and I intend to honor that trust completely. This is unacceptable, my mother cried. We are your family. We are trying to help you. Is that what you call it? I asked, my voice rising with controlled anger. Breaking into my apartment? Going through my private journals? Threatening to use my grief against me in a court of law to strip me of my rights? That isn't help. That is a hostile, calculated attack. Clara, the financial advisor, chose that moment to speak. If we could, for a moment, address the premise of your concern that Lily is incapable of managing these funds, and that you, Mr. Foster, are the superior choice, she said, opening a folder. We've reviewed the extensive financial records left by Mr. and Mrs. Foster Sr. They document approximately $570,000 in loans and investments made to your son, Mark, over the past 8 years, none of which have seen any return. They also document several instances where your own financial advice, Mr. Foster, resulted in portfolio losses that had to be rectified. From a purely objective standpoint, your family's financial track record is, frankly, abysmal. Lily, on the other hand, has lived within her means, has zero debt, and a perfect credit history. By any metric, she is the most fiscally responsible person in this room. Mark turned beet red. My father looked as if he'd been slapped. This is slander, he boomed. It is documented fact, Eleanor countered smoothly. And it would all become public record in any conservatorship hearing you attempted to file. A hearing, I might add, that would be dismissed immediately, likely with sanctions against you for filing in bad faith. She slid the photos I had taken of my ransacked apartment across the table, followed by a copy of the cease and desist letter. This is a formal notice to end all harassment. And should it continue, she added, placing the unsigned restraining order on top, we will file this. I imagine the board of your firm would be very interested to learn that their senior advisor has a restraining order against him for harassing his own daughter after a multi-million-dollar inheritance. The color drained from my father's face. He finally understood. He had lost, but I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about legal and financial victory. This was about the truth. My grandparents knew you would do this, I said, my voice softening with sadness. They knew you wouldn't understand, and they wanted to tell you why themselves. Mr. Harrison turned on the large monitor at the end of the room, the USB drive. And there was my grandfather, sitting in his favorite armchair, his dog, Buster, at his feet. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. Robert, he began, his voice filling the silent room. My son, I love you, but I have spent the better part of 30 years watching you chase a version of success that has nothing to do with happiness or integrity. You value the opinions of strangers at the country club more than the love of your own family. You have taught my grandson, Mark, that passion is worthless without profit, and that failure can always be erased by someone else's checkbook. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Your mother and I are leaving everything to Lily for one simple reason. She is the only one who never asked us for anything. She built a life for herself, a quiet, honorable life, on her own terms. She doesn't see this money as a status symbol or a bailout fund. She will see it as a tool to preserve history, to foster community, to do good in the world. She will honor our memory, not just spend our money. He then looked directly into the camera, and it felt as if he were looking right at me. "And Lily," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "if you are watching this, it means we are gone, and they have hurt you. Please, my dear girl, know your own strength. You are the guardian now. Be brave." The screen went dark. No one spoke. My mother was openly weeping, not tears of manipulation, but of genuine, heartbreaking grief. Mark was staring at his hands, his face pale. My father sat rigid, his mask of authority finally, irrevocably shattered. He looked like what he was, a man who had been weighed and measured by his own father and found wanting. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt an immense, overwhelming sadness for all the years we had lost, for the family we could have been. I stood up. "The meeting is over," I said quietly. "My grandparents' wishes will be honored. The harassment will stop. From now on, any relationship we have will be on my terms, based on respect. If you can't manage that, then we will have no relationship at all." I walked out of the room without looking back, leaving them to sit with the truth and the ghost of the man they had so profoundly misunderstood. Walking out of that conference room was like stepping out of a pressure chamber into a new atmosphere. I didn't realize how much weight I had been carrying, how much I had contorted myself to endure the crushing expectations and emotional manipulation, until it was suddenly gone. The air outside felt lighter, the sounds of Boston traffic sharper, more distinct. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first truly free breath I'd taken in weeks, and it felt like my lungs were expanding for the first time. I walked past my family's expensive cars without a glance, and got into my own sensible sedan, my hands steady on the wheel. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. The locksmith had already changed the locks, a practical step that now felt deeply symbolic. But the space itself felt tainted, the very air thick with the memory of their violation. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a crime scene. Instead, I drove north, following the coastline out of the city, with no destination in mind. The urban landscape blurred into suburbs, then into the rugged, beautiful coastline of Cape Ann. I found a small, unassuming inn overlooking the ocean, paid cash for 2 nights, and checked in under my first name only. For the first time since my grandparents' accident, I was truly, completely alone with my grief. There were no demands, no accusations, no toxic noise, just the raw, aching void they had left behind. I spent hours walking on the cold, windswept beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore, a hypnotic, cleansing sound. I let the salt spray hit my face, and finally, I allowed myself to break. I cried for my grandparents, for the future they would never see, for all the stories my grandfather would never tell me and all the paintings my grandmother would never create. I cried for the family I had lost, or perhaps for the family I had finally admitted to myself I never truly had. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the churning water to liquid gold, I cried with a profound, bone-deep relief for the battle that was finally, blessedly over. I kept my phone off for 48 hours, a deliberate act of severing the toxic cord that had bound me for so long. When I finally turned it back on, the screen lit up with the predictable aftermath. There was a single stilted text from my father. "I received the documents from your lawyer. We will comply." It was the language of a defeated opponent, not a father. There was a long, rambling voicemail from my mother, a confusing, tearful monologue that swirled between apologies, accusations, and self-pity. "How could you do this to us, Lily? After all we've done, I just don't understand. I'm sorry if we overstepped." There were no messages from Mark. I listened to the voicemail, my expression unchanging, then deleted them all. I felt nothing. Just a quiet, hollow emptiness where a lifetime of obligation used to reside. Returning to the city felt like a fresh start. Armed with a new sense of clarity, my first call was to a moving company. "I need everything packed," I told them. "I won't be coming back." While they worked, I drove to my grandparents' farmhouse, the house that was now mine, to begin the heartbreakingly beautiful process of sorting through their lives. I had dreaded this task, but instead of feeling overwhelmed by loss, I felt an immense sense of purpose. This was my first act as their guardian. The house was a perfect snapshot of their last morning. 2 coffee cups sat in the sink. The newspaper was open on the kitchen table to the crossword puzzle, half finished in my grandfather's blocky print. It was painful, but it was also a gift. Every object told a story. I found a pressed wildflower tucked inside my grandmother's favorite book of poetry, a note from my grandfather taped to a jar of jam reading, "Your best batch yet, Evie." In a drawer, I found a box of my old report cards that they had saved, each one covered in my grandmother's proud, looping handwriting. These small discoveries were affirmations of their love, tangible proof of the world they had built, a world I was now charged with protecting. Over the next few weeks, I moved into the farmhouse, surrounding myself with their presence. I found solace in their familiar routines, making coffee in their old percolator, sitting in the sunroom where they had recorded their final message. My first major decision was what to do with the estate. The answer felt obvious, a perfect marriage of my passion and their legacy. I established the Arthur and Evelyn Foster Foundation for Historical Preservation and Literacy. Its mission: to provide grants to the small, underfunded libraries, museums, and historical societies across the state, places like the one I had loved, places that were guardians of memory. I resigned from my job at the town library, a bittersweet decision, and appointed myself the Foundation's first executive director. The work was all-consuming and deeply healing. I poured every ounce of my energy into it, a welcome distraction from the family drama. I soon heard whispers through a cousin about their new reality. My parents had sold their house, the monument to their social standing, and moved into a modest condo. Without the prospect of my inheritance, their lavish lifestyle had crumbled. Mark's company had folded. He was selling used cars. For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of vindictive satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet, detached pity. They weren't being punished. They were simply living in the world as it was, without the safety net of my grandparents' generosity and my silent compliance. It was a world they had never been prepared for, and I wondered if they would ever learn to navigate it. 1 year later, I was standing on the newly restored porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of lavender and rose. The scent of fresh paint from the newly finished trim mingled with the sweet aroma of the honeysuckle that grew wild along the fence line. The house was no longer a place of static grief. It was vibrant and alive, my home. The restoration had been a labor of love, a physical act of rebuilding my own life by honoring theirs. Every stripped floorboard and reglazed window felt like a step further away from the wreckage of the past. My life was unrecognizable, filled with a purpose I had only dreamed of. The Arthur and Evelyn Foster Foundation was thriving. In our first year, we had accomplished more than I thought possible. We fully funded the digitization of 3 small-town archives, preserving fragile records for generations to come. We saved a historic one-room schoolhouse in the Berkshires from demolition, and it was now a thriving local museum. We had provided literacy grants that put thousands of new books into the hands of children in rural communities, and I had a folder full of their crayon-drawn thank you cards that I treasured more than any stock certificate. I had even received a tearful call from a young college student who, thanks to our scholarship, was the first person in her family to study archival science. I felt my grandparents' presence in every one of these small victories. The silence from my family had eventually been broken, not with a bang, but with a hesitant whisper. About 6 months after the confrontation, my mother had called. Her voice was different, smaller, stripped of its usual defensive edge. She asked if I would have lunch with her. I was wary, my guard instinctively up, but some part of me was curious, so I agreed. We met at a neutral cafe. There were no demands, no manipulations. Instead, she talked about her new, smaller condo. She talked about how strange it felt not to be constantly planning a social event, how she had started painting again, picking up a hobby my grandmother had tried to teach her years ago. "I've been going to therapy, Lily," she admitted, her gaze fixed on her teacup. I realized I spent so much of my life focused on the wrong things, on what other people thought. I thought providing Mark with money was the same as providing love. And I always thought, because you were so quiet and self-sufficient, you didn't need me. It was easier that way. It wasn't a perfect apology. not the one a younger version of me had longed for, but it was something far more valuable. It was honest. Our relationship began to slowly, cautiously rebuild on this new, more truthful ground. She started volunteering at one of the libraries our foundation supported, reading to children. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. My father was a harder case. His pride, the very core of his identity, had been deeply wounded. But he too, eventually, reached out in his own way. He sent me an email with the subject line, "Your grandfather's investments." In it, he pointed out a subtle market trend he thought might affect one of the foundation's holdings, complete with charts and analysis. It was his language of care, the only one he knew. It was an offering of his expertise without any strings attached. I wrote back, thanking him for the insight and asking a follow-up question. From there, we began a slow, awkward correspondence. Our relationship rebuilt one stock tip at a time. Mark remained a ghost. I saw him once at a family gathering for Christmas. The swagger was gone, replaced by a weary resentment. He was quiet, sullen, and he couldn't meet my eyes. He had lost his safety net, and he didn't know how to live without it. Justice, I realized, wasn't a dramatic event. It was the quiet, inevitable reality of people having to live with the consequences of who they are. My own life had also found a new, unexpected joy. Through my foundation work, I met a man named Ben. He was an architect who specialized in historic building restoration. We met while collaborating on the schoolhouse project, spending an entire afternoon arguing passionately about the historical accuracy of window casings. He was kind, funny, and he shared my reverence for the past. He loved the farmhouse, not for its monetary value, but for its hand-carved banisters and wavy, imperfect glass windows. Our relationship grew slowly, organically, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared passions. One evening, Ben and I were sitting on the porch. He was sketching ideas for a new garden layout, incorporating my grandmother's favorite perennials. "You know," he said, looking up at me, his eyes warm in the fading light, "for someone who inherited a fortune, you live a pretty simple life." I smiled, looking out at the fields my grandparents had cherished. "My grandparents left me with a lot more than money," I said. "They left me a roadmap. They showed me what was truly valuable. The money is just the vehicle I'm using to follow it. It's not the destination." He reached over and took my hand, understanding completely. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. The wounds had scarred over, no longer raw and aching. I had not only protected my grandparents' legacy, but I had also finally discovered my own. I had a family of choice, not just of blood, and it was more valuable than any inheritance. Looking back on that tumultuous, transformative year, I've come to understand with absolute clarity that my grandparents' final gift wasn't the $30 million. That was just the catalyst, the sudden, seismic event that forced all the hidden, festering cracks in our family's foundation to break wide open under the strain. Their true inheritance, the one that has fundamentally reshaped my soul and redefined my future, was a profound and deeply personal lesson in value. For as long as I could remember, I had subconsciously allowed my parents and brother to be the primary appraisers of my worth. My value was measured against their materialistic external standards. A career they didn't respect, a quiet personality they misinterpreted as weakness, and a life of simple passions that didn't fit into their narrow, glossy definition of success. Without ever consciously deciding to, I had accepted their flawed valuation and had meticulously, painstakingly made myself smaller to fit into the cramped, uncomfortable box they had built for me. I had learned to apologize for my own existence. The inheritance shattered that box and forced a radical reevaluation. It acted as a harsh, unforgiving lens that brought every falsehood and every ugly truth into painfully sharp focus. It revealed that my family's entire value system was built on a flimsy, rotting framework of money, status, and public appearance. When faced with a choice between their own daughter, their own flesh and blood, and a fortune, they didn't hesitate. They were willing to sacrifice my well-being, my sanity, and my reputation on the altar of their greed. But the most important revelation wasn't about them. It was about my grandparents, and by powerful extension, about me. They saw value where my parents saw none. They cherished integrity. They honored passion. They celebrated kindness, and they admired quiet strength. By leaving their entire legacy in my hands, they were holding up a giant, irrefutable mirror to me and saying, with their final, powerful act, "This is who you are. This is what you are worth. We see you, truly and completely, even when others refuse to look." Their meticulously planned legacy box was so much more than a brilliant legal strategy. It was an act of profound, preemptive love, a final embrace from beyond the veil. It was their way of arming me for a battle they knew, with heartbreaking prescience, that I would have to fight alone. They couldn't be there in person to defend me, to stand by my side and tell my father he was wrong, so they left me their wisdom, their foresight, and their unwavering belief in me as my weapons. They taught me the most crucial and liberating lesson of all: true family, the kind that nurtures your spirit, doesn't demand that you shrink yourself for their comfort. They don't see your boundaries as a personal betrayal or your strength as a threat to their own. They celebrate who you are, in all your glorious complexities. They arm you for life's battles. They don't become the battle you have to fight. Through the crucible of this fire, I learned that setting boundaries is not an act of aggression or selfishness, as I had been conditioned to believe. It is a fundamental, non-negotiable act of self-preservation. It's drawing a clear, unapologetic line in the sand and declaring, with a voice that is finally your own, "My well-being, my peace, and my values matter. They are not up for debate." The people who truly love you, the ones who genuinely deserve a place in the sacred circle of your life, will respect that line. They may not always understand it, but they will honor it. And the ones who try to cross it, who guilt you for having it, who rage against it, they were never truly on your side to begin with. They were only there for what you could give them. The beautiful life I have now, one filled with purpose, genuine connection, and a deep, abiding sense of peace, wasn't simply given to me by the inheritance. It was built. It was built piece by painful piece, after I made the terrifying but ultimately necessary decision to stop accepting a valuation that was never accurate and to stand up and claim my own worth. The money was merely the tool. It gave me the freedom and the resources to build the life my grandparents knew I was capable of, the life I finally believed I deserved. So, here is my question for you. For anyone who has felt unseen or undervalued, have you ever had to choose between your own mental and emotional well-being and your family's expectations? How did you find the strength to draw your own line in the sand and honor your own truth? I would love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. Your experiences are valid and powerful, and we can all learn so much from each other's journeys. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own inner strength or gave you even a small sliver of hope, please do me a kindness and hit that like button. And subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your voice. And please consider sharing this video with someone who might be struggling to see their own value, someone who might need to hear that they are the ultimate and final authority on their own worth. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always have the courage to be the guardian of your own beautiful, important life.